Can you hear me, Dane?
Yeah, can you hear me?
All right. Yes.
Cool.
We are. Sorry, it's been such. I normally have a great setup, and today it's just been a comedy of errors. Nothing to do with you. With the Skype, I forgot my headphones at home, sort of whole thing. Anyways, so thank you. Sorry for so many delays.
Oh no,
For inviting me on. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, my lack of real professionalism around this helps with accommodating delays. Doesn't really matter. But yeah, so you're Jon Askonas. Did I pronounce your last name? Yeah, and you are
Usually I say Askonas, but I'm not taking it. Yeah.
You know, that now that I hear that said out loud, it's has a better ring to it. Askonas.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
So you're at Catholic University in D.C.?
I am, yeah. That's my main my day job, and then I'm also a senior fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation.
Foundation for American Innovation. Okay, yeah, and that reminds me, I wanted to bring up the Alliance for Progress is an organization I believe you're involved in.
Alliance for the Future.
Alliance for the Future. Yeah. The AFP is surely someone else's name.
Yeah, no, I think it is, which is why I hasten to correct it. Yeah.
Cool. So, yeah, I noticed Skype. It said that you were in Chicago. You perhaps were
wrong, Tommy. That's where I'm from. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I had a Skype account since I was in middle school or something, and I haven't used it in a very long time.
Yeah, you do look somewhat different. Yeah, so when I think of Catholic universities, I think of both the Chicago area and the area you're in now. Well, the entire Boston to Washington corridor. I just think kind of a classic Catholic liberal institutions and so forth. Notre Dame is actually in Indianapolis. Is that correct? Not Chicago?
Notre Dame. So I'm at Catholic University of America, which is in Washington, D.C. Notre Dame is in South Bend, Indiana.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is the Chicago area, but it is in Indiana. Okay, I get that confused sometimes. I think Oliver Traldi was schooled out there, or might still be there.
Oliver is. He's doing a PhD at Notre Dame. I don't know if he's finished it yet, but he is definitely there.
Cool. Yeah, we have a shared appreciation for a thinker named Jeffrey Friedman, who passed away. I know him. Passed away about 1.5 years ago now. Yeah, he was the editor of a journal called Critical Review. And he was something of a classical liberal or libertarian gadfly, and he really explored a lot of very interesting issues, sort of taking, engaging in a kind of imminent critique of classical liberalism, albeit he still remained one for reasons with Albert Hirschman's notion of exit, rather than some kind of natural rights.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
In any case, yeah, so you've been making the rounds the last few years with, I think, exploring pretty novel issues, things that you don't typically see conservatives having explored. Of course, you're on the younger side. You're part of a new generation of people, I would say, who are at least grappling with post-liberalism, or may not describe yourself as one, but, looking at the kind of 20th century consensus around liberal truisms and seeing just how robust they really are. And so I'm thinking right now of the article I think you wrote for the New Atlantis about consensus reality, and that was a series of articles, and one relating to Tucker Carlson and how Jon Stewart in the 2000s kind of paved the way for this infotainment postmodern blend of truthiness and all of that.
Yes.
You want to kind of summarize that and maybe add something since that article came out, which I believe was 2022 or early 23?
Yeah, it came out, I think it was 2022, and that series is ongoing, and I've had to sort of set it aside for several months, maybe a year, but we're back working on getting a few more essays in and finishing it out. So the argument was, as you said, is that it traced the evolution of infotainment and really the demise of journalism and demise of the notion of a mainstream media or a singular media public square, and looking at through the lens of the figure of Jon Stewart, who's someone who very much saw himself as calling for a new kind of integrity in journalism, but we argue pioneered the business models and the incentives and the style and the practices of a kind of infotainment which is perfectly suited to kind of the fragmentation brought on by the internet. And ironically, of course, one of the most successful, if not the most successful, when I wrote the essay at the time, Tucker Carlson was the number one, by far the number one personality in cable news, the number one cable news host of all time by ratings. And we argued that he is the apotheosis of this revolution that Stewart started, and kind of chronicling the journey from when Stewart goes on Crossfire, CNN's Crossfire, and just eviscerates Tucker Carlson, gets him canceled basically, to Carlson, adopting and learning the same techniques from Stewart, and then succeeding in his own way on Fox News with those. But really, it's also an essay about the shape of the media in the post-internet era, in the era of many-to-many communications.
Yeah, some have said, well, actually, I'd like to back up just a little bit. I remember, circa 2009 or so, academics like Jay Rosen in NYU, I think, but he kind of criticizing the journalistic view from nowhere, which is what he called, just sort of somewhat half-thinkingly accepting that there are, two sides and just getting, one party's account of things and the other party's account of things. And so there was effort underway, not just in the world of entertainment / news, but pure academics that I think also kind of put us where we are now. This kind of criticism of the notion of objectivity in journalism. Do you see that having much input there?
Well, I think it's an interesting question of it's a bit of a chicken and the egg question of which came first, this critique of objectivity, or the destruction of the structures which had made objectivity powerful or profitable. So, Stewart, going all the way back to the late 90s, even before The Daily Show, actually, you can find some very interesting videos of Stewart on other talk shows in the 90s as a comedian. And then obviously, even as soon as he arrives to The Daily Show, he makes this critique of so-called journalistic, of one vision of journalistic objectivity, which is, journalistic objectivity is you report on the news, the facts of the day. But in so doing, this is Stewart's critique, you are submitting yourself over to a media machine that decides what is important or not. So Stewart, going for 20, 25, 30 years now, he's been saying the most important thing that journalists do is decide what's important. And you can't be objective. That's not an objective decision. And so you should make a decision on what is important and not pretend that it's anything but an active interpretation, right? So to be a good journalist is to decide to actually go and find important stories and elevate those stories, right? So it's not a critique about the idea of objective truth per se. And maybe the other parts of the academy for whom that's more salient, but for Stewart, that's not really a part of it. But of course, once you exit, and I think one can sympathize with Stewart, right? I mean, in some ways, he's not that far apart from Daniel Borstein's critique of media, which is that we create this sort of alternative reality, but it's a singular alternative reality of the news. And Stewart definitely wants to undercut that, but in his mind, the singular self-serving news will be replaced by a practice that actually speaks to what's important in and for the political community. But what actually happens is you have a total fragmentation of the media space, and you have kind of niche subscriptions or influencers who form their own alternative realities in which they elevate their own notions of kind of what is important and what actually makes for the news. And so today, if you go on, if you look at Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, much less, the Free Press of Barry Weiss, Pirate Wires, Tucker Carlson, InfoWars, the full spectrum, right? Young Turks. Unless something really dramatic happens, they're all talking about different things. There's no shared conversation. There's no big story, to use a term for media criticism of the 1980s and 1990s. That wasn't really possible before this sort of many-to-many communications world. So my suspicion is that the more important factor is the economic and structural factors, but I think that's an interesting question there.
Yeah, some say that in many ways we've returned to a kind of pre-20th century, more 19th century style dissemination of news, where you'll have a Catholic perspective, or a Union member's perspective, communist, liberal, Protestant, so forth. Some of them are sort of materialist, i.e., it's people in a certain industry who have their way of disseminating news and their particular framework. Industry rags, news for the boss, news for the worker, news for the white man, news for the black man, so forth. There is a kind of return to demography combined with journalism in that way now. But do you think that we are kind of returning to this pre-20th century thing, or is it really nothing like that, except for superficially, the variety we see?
Well, it's an interesting question. I thought about this a lot, and I should credit Andre Meir and Martin Gary. I think have done some really fabulous work thinking about these issues.
Yeah.
I think the differences are more important than the similarities. So it's true, before advertising-supported media, you had subscriber-supported media, and we've returned to subscriber-supported media, which always has a kind of distinctive point of view. But the critical difference, I think, is in those 19th century newspapers, that newspaper was still your way of figuring out what was going on in the world. And there was still a certain amount of value in reporting what was going on. Right? And you would sort of feel like you weren't getting your money's worth if important things that were just going on in the world were not really covered by, or in your local area, were not covered in your newspaper. And so just because of this commitment to giving you the news, there is a kind of overlap or a form of consensus. Now, you don't really need that, right? The events of the day come at you through a fire hose. And what you're really looking for is what the industry now calls news analysis, which is telling you how to think about or how to interpret the news, narrativizing the news for you in line with other broader existing narratives.
Explainer journalism, I've heard it.
Exactly, yeah. So that dominates news now in a way that was not true in the 19th century. And the reason is we're living in an age of information superabundance. So literally nobody will pay for getting the facts, at least not the sort of generic facts of the day. In particular industries, where having the facts offers an advantage, you still see people paying for that. But for just normal people going about their lives, nobody's going to pay for the facts, because you can get them on Twitter, you can get them on Yahoo News, you can get them literally anywhere for free. So what people will actually pay for is news analysis, as well as personality and story and narrative, right? So influencers and having a parasocial relationship with someone who's creating and producing news.
Yeah, I actually, speaking of Tucker Carlson and Jon Stewart, watching their most recent videos, Jon Stewart talking about, the conflagration in Israel, Palestine, and Tucker Carlson talking about the same, it actually struck me how much more unserious Stewart was. He's doing a live audience thing with a round of applause, and then Carlson is just this kind of morose, straightforward, one man to one man kind of conversation with a priest on a very pretty dour, subjective Palestinian Christian. So at least most recently, Stewart is much more flippant in the way that he approaches news than Carlson. But Carlson's the one who will get tagged as a grifter, So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's they're both doing the same thing now, though, right? It's both providing the narrative that their audience most wants to hear, and of course, the not just the text, but also the subtext, the context, the vibes, that's different for their audiences, and they're both. But I think Tucker is much more skilled at this than Stewart. I think, and Stewart was always funniest when he was lampooning the news itself. But because of his own success, there's no TV news has been abolished. Basically, nobody watches TV news anymore. So there's no comedic juice in going after TV news. And so
my parents do. They watch.
Parents. That's right. You boomers do.
Yeah, Lester Holt is still central figure in a lot of people's homes in the evening. But yeah, I remember reading years ago that the Daily Show, the late 2000s again. I was harkening back to that time. I graduated college then, and Pew Research I think reported that Jon Stewart Daily Show was the main news outlet for people in college. That was their favorite
Absolutely.
network, as it were. And and I remember people at the time also talking about the kind of right-wing information machine or misinformation machine, and I wanted to draw people attention to the fact that your favorite news is from a comedian, but it just didn't feel like they were the ones being because their orientation, their general framework was coming from the center. It was much more institutional. It was vouched for by the professional class in a way that made it still seem serious, no matter how serious, in fact, Alex Jones appeared to be at the time, relative to Jon Stewart's cracking jokes. They thought that was the serious news, and that seriously delivered conservative news was fake and comical. But in any case, a lot of it is, I guess, a kind of a pre-vibes vibes is what I got at that point from about, from as far as veracity and trustworthiness went. They really put a lot of stock into Stewart. So let's see, let's pivot now to, not to use a corporate term that I can't get out of my head now, pivot to this, pivot to that. So you're at a Catholic university, but that does not make you a Cath trad per se, right?
No, I'm actually I'm Anglo-Catholic, Anglican Catholic, sort of high and dry Anglican. But I teach here at Catholic University, and I'm very on board with the mission of Catholic education.
Okay, now the Alliance for the Future, that at kind of a quick glance, it seems that you're on the sort of pro-tech side of the general, side determination here. But the Cath trads are not particularly keen on tech, not either biotech or AI, just basically the entire thrust of the kind of techno-commercial telos board. How do you differ with them? Someone like Patrick Deneen.
I was, Rehan Salam put it to me once that I'm a traditionalist accelerationist, which I love and I think is exactly right. So I think the thing I would differ from with is the instinctual kind of traditionalist hatred of, distrust of technology is the belief that there's no going back and the only way out is through, right? That we are past the tipping point of the takeover of human life or the human species by technological society, and that the only way even to restore a semblance of humanism is to master technology itself, master the process of building technologies, master an understanding of how technologies reshape society. And that doesn't mean that you embrace every technology. In fact, quite the opposite. It means in some ways, the traditionalist position isn't thoughtful enough, right? It's just a generic distrust of new technologies. But at the same time, it ends up being a generic acquiescence to new technologies as long as they are rolled out slowly enough, with a few exceptions. And I think a position that has a human future most squarely in mind is most interested in actually trying to understand the impacts of new technologies on society, channeling and building technology towards a human future, and as well as fighting it or resisting it or abolishing it when it pushes in the other direction. So, if you, for one example, if kind of the rise of eugenicist reproductive technology abhors you, as it does me, it's not simply enough to say we have to ban that, right? There are all these other issues in our society that have created a demand for that technology, right? So you need to counteract that with new technology. So we need to lower the cost of having kids, lower the cost of having a family life by decreasing energy costs, increasing energy intensity in our society again, as a way of counteracting the demand for these sort of reproductive technologies. So that's my vision for kind of technological accelerationism. And I've written about that in Compact Magazine and American Affairs. I have a lot more work that I'm doing on that right now.
Okay, yeah, I had a somewhat of a dispute with a guy named Alexander Mershak, a YouTuber, in a recent interview, and I was kind of he comes from a kind of new right position, fusing, but he's also pro tech, he's in the tech sector, and I thought that was somewhat of an odd combination. I don't know if you know about that writer Ines Lyons. He had an article on
Oh,
right wing progressives, and
mm,
and sometimes I feel like some of these quote unquote trad guys in tech are really, they simply have a preference for AI, but the transhumanism and the mastery over nature that, say, transgenderism represents, they find reprehensible. And I put it to him that, well, aren't these both kind of, don't these both represent the kind of Faustian spirit of mastery over nature and pro tech in their own ways? And he said, no. And then we were discussing it a bit more, and it seemed to me that the embrace of AI was partially driven by a recognition that we are in a great power competition with, say, China, whereas transgenderism, that doesn't do any society any good, and and so that's sort of the difference when we hash this out. And so we're, in a sense, we're forced to accept AI and not reject it, whereas what you could call a, yes, tech-driven augmentation of the human body in a way that transcends male and female, well, that's really not relevant to economic growth in the same way. So we can actually turn our back on that and reject that kind of tech. What do you think?
yeah, I think there's always this. I mean, Leo Strauss writes. So I think it's in Discourses of Machiavelli that the traditional classical philosophy abhorred technological innovation. And the only exception that classical philosophy recognized was for war and for purposes of war, precisely for this reason, right? That if you are out innovated by the enemy, if you resist using technology because of its social implications in war, you'll just be destroyed, and your society will be destroyed. And so this justifies using technology. Although it's interesting, there was not, classical Athens did not have a technology commercialization office, right? There was not this attempt to take military technology and find commercial uses for it. And I think that's something, in our society, we've been far too, one of the points I make in my compact essay, at least as a sketch, is we've been far too willing to let the military set the agenda for the future for basic science and research, right? And then just to adopt what are basically weapons in our social lives, right? Like the computer is a weapon, the smartphone is a weapon, AI is a weapon. We should be circumspect about the effects these things have in our society. That being said, I am more bullish on AI, and I think a kind of Christian perspective on AI finds a lot of the concerns of especially the rationalists to be somewhat absurd. I find that the more you have a Christian anthropology of the soul and of the person, the less impressed you are by AI and the less concerned you are about some kind of AI takeover. So I think that certainly affects me as well. I just don't see many of the downsides in it. I see more of the upsides.
Okay. Yeah, I do get the impression that, AI is to be embraced, biotech is to be, very cautiously engaged with. And there's a real crucial difference there.
Yeah.
The idea that AI is anti-traditional, it's almost so obvious that it's anti-traditional that you miss it. Because
I disagree.
It's a kind of odd facsimile of the human experience, and a lot of people on the right seem to be embracing it.
I disagree that it's anti-traditional. It's quite the opposite. I think it provides a unique opportunity to recover the Western civilization. Right, you have a technology which is quite literally built by distilling everything that has ever been said and thought into these new corpuses. Every LLM, every good LLM, is sitting ready to be prompted to produce more and better and to recover, retrieve every major artistic movement, every major poetic movement, every major architectural movement. You as soon as you start playing around with image generation systems, or you almost can't help but make beautiful things with them. Now it's quite shallowy and surfacey. I think there's quite a ways to development to go, but I think it could be a very powerful tool for helping us recover our heritage. it also increases the value of knowing, of understanding one's history, right? The only way to prompt an LLM is to actually know, already have a sense within yourself of what the sort of full terrain of the human experience is. The more of the human experience, of human history, of human art, of human literature, of human whatever that you have mastered yourself, the broader vocabulary you have to work with the AI. And that's even before we get to things like using AIs to actually recover ancient texts, like what they're doing in Herculaneum. So I don't know if I agree that AI is anti-traditional in this sense.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point, and I think I'm often sort of led astray by the specifically chatbot experience replacing, IRL interactions and the
Sure.
the threat that Western youth going in a kind of a Japanese youth direction of hikikomori and whatever, and just
yes,
that's not the end all be all of what AI is. I understand that. What do you think of the? So you say AI can be used to kind of shore up the greatest aspects of civilization, but what about the cultural aspect of the professional class made up of largely blue tribers being the ones, like as we saw with Gemini and so forth, and it's something Brian Shaw has written about too. The kind of wokeness being direct, perfectly embedded into these AI systems. How plausible is it really that AI will be used to kind of shore up the best of the Western tradition? Given that we know who's in charge of rolling this stuff out.
Well, I think that's exactly what we need to fight for, right? That's why we need to fight for open. That's why I got involved with Alliance for the Future. So we need to fight for open source AI. We need to fight for a competitive AI landscape. Is that there is certainly a threat of as our friend James Poulos likes to say, of catechizing the bots, of producing and restricting AI systems to only produce outcomes as a tool of social control by kind of the professional managerial class. That's a very real possibility, and it's one we need to fight. And in addition to kind of touch on what you said earlier about the like otaku culture or hikikomori, I think in a sense AI supercharges the trend that Cal Newport identified in Deep Work of the effects that this technology has on people who are long on passion, long on careful attention, vastly different from those who are short on passion and short on careful attention. So if you just use these technologies to entertain yourself, then you're going to end up the kind of ultimate bugman, last man end of history, in the pod, eating the bugs, watching the VR porn. But if you come to them with a sense of mission and a sense of history and practices of attention and discipline, then I think you have a vastly different way of using them.
Yeah, and I sense that part of the difference between the kind of high-tech right and more populist right, and I lean more populist here, is that when you think about the implications for AI, you're more concerned with its effect on the bottom half of the population rather than the top. So driving them further down as opposed to increasing the abilities of those at the top. So I'm not sure which is actually the better angle to take on that. Where should the locus of concern be?
Yeah.
I lean toward being concerned about how this stuff affects people at the bottom of society, and not so much how it might augment and boost and be some kind of auxiliary to the best and brightest among us. So whereas someone like Richard Hanania, I think absolutely is the latter, right? He wants to, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think that's where smart politics and prudential political thinking comes in, right? So just off the top of my head, some of the dangers for the bottom 50% of the income or cognitive or whatever distribution would be obviously kind of the endless entertainment aspect. So particularly doing whatever we can to restrict exploitive, kind of gambling style, addictive applications that use hyper-personalized AI, whether it's in pornography or AI girlfriends or even video games or whatever. I think that's a really important area to think about regulating. I think I think what this does to education is still very up in the air. Although there's an interesting question of like, is it better to have an AI tutor that's really good, or be stuck in a failing public school with quote unquote real teachers? I think that's an interesting question. I think when you look at something else I'm going to say about the bottom 50%. Yeah, but you could. I think you're absolutely right to focus on that. I will say, if we actually, again, if we made it our task to actually regulate in this space, I don't know how difficult it would be to, I think what you find, if it's anything like any of the other internet technologies we have, it's not as if people on the top and above and below that line are using the same technologies in the same way. I think it's actually quite, it's the same underlying tech stack, maybe like computers, the internet, or whatever. But once you get beyond that, when you look at applications and platforms, there are some pretty strong distinctions to be made. So I don't think you're gonna necessarily lose the top half if you regulate the bottom half.
Yeah, we think of China as being this kind of cold, pro-tech authoritarian state, which then we sort of vaguely map onto, which is, to be honest, But
they regulate the crap out of entertainment technology.
Yeah, they crack down on the kind of the superficial side of tech while boosting the hard side of tech. They're pro hardware tech,
yep.
While making sure. Well, I can't say they're making sure, but they're making an attempt at preventing 13-year-old boys from becoming 20-hour-a-day video game addicts. And I kind of respect them for doing that. And I wish we could do that here, but I know that frankly we're quite liberty-pilled. That's a very different or very difficult thing to do, actually. There's all of these kind of knock-on effects that we look at the way the sausage gets made, and we end up not wanting to do that. Even something like low-hanging fruit.
I think that's a really interesting question of so you asked, you sort of were chatting earlier about kind of post-liberalism. I guess when I've thought about this, I don't identify as a post-liberal per se, but I think I would describe myself maybe as a descriptive post-liberal. Like I think we are post-liberalism, regardless of, and I've written about this for Fusion, for instance, whether or not we want to be post-liberalism, we are post-liberalism. We are because of the massive changes in our technological environment. So, does the liberal conception of the person, of the individual, survive a world in which hyper-personalized super stimuli are readily available throughout the one's the economy, one's environment? Whether it's biological fentanyl or digital fentanyl, I think it's difficult to maintain certainly the kind of blasé assumptions about the freedom of the individual in a world in which these kinds of enslaving technologies are widespread.
Yeah, I think the term super stimuli is really not even part of the liberal lexicon, but the post-liberals are quite aware of that danger. The liberal stance is essentially, more choice the better, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
But I sort of started going down this road before anyone was using post-liberal. We had behavioral economics and the books like Nudge that were already kind of showing us where human frailty can get in the way of positive life outcomes. Not taking into account future as much, and always going for the easy, quick grab. So that's part of what's led me down this road to being more skeptical of markets. But as I say, that you can't really ignore the nuts and bolts of policy, and there's all of these secondary effects to this stuff that the liberals have always warned us about, with the notion of unintended consequences. So I hesitate to take a stronger approach like China, but I'm sympathetic and like some kind of disgruntled socialist who has to admit that capitalism outperforms their preferred system. I'm looking for a way to kind of rein in some of the worst aspects of capitalism while maintaining our liberty-pilled preferences, and it's just hard.
Well, I think one way to look at it, though, is I think in an American system, you can devolve. I think you need to do two things. One, you need to ensure that communities like that other intermediary institutions in American life have the authority to control their use of technology. And that authority is a legal, a political, an economic, and a technological authority. And then you need to devolve these questions to the appropriate level. Like, I don't think that we need necessarily federal legislation solving all these issues. But, if kind of the status quo is that we have a system where you federal preemption of the regulation of commerce and sometimes state preemption of the regulation of commerce deprives other kinds of communities of actually having really robust control over the technologies that they use. And so we're beginning to see pushback against that. I mean, I'm very heartened by the social media and the attempts to regulate social media and pornography access for minors, but I think we can do a lot more. So I guess in China you have a centralized authoritarian system.
Are you referring to the Florida legislation?
Well, I mean, legislation in Florida, Louisiana, Utah, Kentucky. They just signed in Kentucky, Texas. There's been an outpouring of states signing these bills, and now there's a number of some court cases that are on their way to the Supreme Court about various legal aspects of these bills.
Yeah, I find it interesting that Jonathan Haidt and his sometimes partner Greg Lukianoff, the kind of late 2010s exemplars of free speech liberalism, they've started to there's some growing tension there. Greg Lukianoff is not entirely enthusiastic about Jonathan Haidt's concern about phone use and some of the laws now being implemented, such as no phones in schools, although that's a difficult thing to do, not least of which because of school shootings. Parents want to be able to get a hold of their kids right away. So that's, so there's starting to be some tension there with regard to both, freedom of speech, but also concern about youth well-being, really adults as well. But, we start with youth. That's the most sympathetic age group. So, how that's going to play out is interesting. I know that some of the pushback on the Florida law was concern about privacy for adults, having to prove that they are above 14 or something, and end up turning over certain information about you that wasn't required before. But frankly, so what? Just
it seems very trivial. I mean, we use the internet for all kinds of meaningful things nowadays, and that includes biometric verification, government ID verification, credit card verification, and also thanks to like blockchain and decentralized protocols, we have better tools than ever to share facts without sharing underlying data. So the porn industry, the social media industry, big tech have pushed out a lot of, frankly, propaganda, a lot of misleading talking points around this that are really just kind of beside the point.
Yeah, I mean, the privacy flew the coop quite a while ago. That doesn't mean I want to go. I don't want to support bold new ventures into revelations of people's personal lives. But there's so much that's already there.
Yeah.
So
but
just
also, come on, like the Experian data, like privacy, like you said, privacy flew the coop. Like Experian was hacked. The Chinese, have a bunch of almost all of our information from the OPM hack a few years ago. Like, at least if we're not going to have privacy online, and it seems very clear, then at least let's get something socially useful out of it.
Yeah, there's a way in which the kind of Electronic Frontier Foundation 2003 liberalism it's just not holding up, and more of that kind of stuff has been revealed as animus against conservatism in any case. So but I think I'm gonna move toward wrapping it up. John, is there any final thoughts here? Maybe talk a bit about Alliance for Future a little more in depth, and then
so I mean, the you mentioned Brian Chow. He's our executive director of Alliance for the Future. I'm just involved on the board, and we're looking to kind of create a 501c4 advocacy organization aimed at preserving tech freedom, and especially open source AI and the right to use and benefit from AI without it being controlled by a small number of monopolists. That's sort of the main threat right now. And we're doing everything from political organizing and lobbying, and to more kind of white papers and comment letters and all the stuff you need to do to actually kind of shape policy in DC. So if anyone's interested in getting involved, you can get in touch with me or Brian on Twitter. or wherever else. You know, you can find my email pretty easily. And yeah, it's exciting. We've had a huge outpouring of support already. I mean, in some ways, we're just trying to create a focal point for conversations and interest that's already been expressed.
Cool. Well, sounds good. Thank Jon Askonas. Thanks for coming through. And yeah, we finally did it. And
finally did it. And I'm
thanks for having me on. Late or last fall or something like that. But yeah, it's cool to finally do it. Take care. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thank you.